pretty much you can follow right along there. We have read the narrative. This is on the person, Abigail. Next week we have Esther. Okay, we're on page 55. 55, starting with question 1. Okay, in 1 Samuel 24, now this doesn't have anything to do with Abigail. 1 Samuel 24. What impresses you about David's restraint? What went on in verse 24? What's he talking about there? Anybody know?
That's when he was in the same case as Saul. And he could have killed Saul, but because Saul was the Lord's anointed, David didn't.
Very good. Yes, this is the incident where David could have taken Saul's life, and he did not. So what impresses you, the question is then, what impresses you about David's restraint? He showed great restraint. Now, don't forget, David was living a pretty tough life right about here. He was being chased all over by Saul, and Saul was out to get him. And, that's got to be a pretty tough way to live. And David happens upon him and catches him unawares and could have killed him right there. He decided not to do it. What impresses you about David's restraint?
His self-obedience to God.
In what way?
His restraint.
Okay, David felt that it was not his place to kill the anointed one of God.
Right.
And so he showed restraint by not killing him. And so that shows you a little bit about the character of David and his thinking, which is different in chapter 25. He changes completely, which we talked about last week to some degree. We'll talk a little bit more about it this week. So, number 2, give a word description of Nabal. Now, who was Nabal? To refresh our minds a little bit. Who was Nabal?
Abigail's scoundrel of a husband.
Abigail's scoundrel of a husband. That's probably putting it lightly. From everything I read there, which isn't much, but it's enough to let me know that this was not a nice guy by any stretch, and she was stuck with him. So, what's a one word? Now, we have more than one word in here that gives a description. So pick your choice, but can you come up with a different word? Let's put it that way. Can you come up with a different word?
Self-absorbed.
Self what?
Absorbed.
Very good. That's the line that I was thinking of. I used, he was a pure narcissist. I mean, complete. I mean, the world revolved around him, and there are lots of people out there like that. They just, for some reason, think the world, just should bow to their every whim, and that was him. And he did exactly what he wanted, and that was that. And it sure did. Now, Scripture doesn't go into it, but just trying to draw off some inferences there, doesn't sound like Abigail had a very good time here. How could you? But yet, she tolerated it, so to speak. And that's an interesting thing. We're going to get into that too. Number 3. How is Abigail's example a real-life application of 1 Peter 3? Can somebody read that for us, 1 Peter 3? 1 Peter 3, 1 and 2.
Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear.
Okay, that is a pretty good description, as far as I can see, of Abigail in this situation. That's a tough situation. I mean, I don't know how you put it any other way. Can you imagine living day to day to day to day like this in such a difficult situation? But yet, that's what Peter has to say. Be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, which he certainly didn't, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives. Now, I wonder how many people in this world, in this country, think about that verse when they run into a tough situation in marriage. Now, this is not to say, by any stretch, that a woman needs to bear the brunt of abusive behavior. That is not saying this. A woman has every right to get out of an abusive relationship, but you got to do it the right way. That's the kind of thing, you just don't run off for a divorce. Some can be very, up to being your life being threatened. There's nothing in Scripture that tells me that you got to hang around for something like that. That doesn't mean you can run off and get a divorce, though. It doesn't mean that. So we don't want to get into that, but it does not mean that. It just means that you don't have to put yourself in harm's way if you run into that kind of a situation. That's not what Peter is saying there either. Okay. So how is Abigail's real life application? Example. How is Abigail's example a real life application of this? What was she willing to do? Obviously. How is Abigail's example a real life application of 1 Peter 3? And it is a good example. It's a good parallel there. Because she found herself in this kind of a situation. Now, we're not given really any details about what went on. You don't know. I'm not getting the drift that she was in an abusive situation. I'm just not getting that drift, but it doesn't say, so we don't know. It does say that she lived a very kind of plush life there. She was kind of living high on the hog there in that situation. Nabal was, seems to me, a pretty well-off person, and she was benefiting from that because she had servants and whatnot. And so I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that necessarily she was in some sort of an abusive relationship. Now, define abusive. Just being ignored is an abuse, is it not? That's not marriage. That's an abusive marriage. All the way to the point it could be mental abuse, it could be physical abuse. And obviously Abigail did suffer some of that kind of abuse. But I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that she was being physically abused. I wouldn't jump to that. Certainly, mentally, I would think she was just being ignored. From what little we can get from that. Any other thoughts on that?
I think today that a lot of women will think that because their husband or boyfriend or whatever their scenario is, their partner may not be a religious person, then by default they shouldn't be. But if we look at these stories and we look at the scriptures, we are going to be judged individually. We're not going to be judged as a couple. You may be in a marriage to where you go and they don't, or they go and you don't. But that's a consequence of your own actions. I can't I can't help anyone else, even if it is my partner, get into heaven. I need to help them with my example, my being, and keep them going with what I believe and see, but I physically can't trade them or pull them along. They need to make that decision on their own. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at we're talking about abuse and different things, that's not going to deter them from keeping their eye on the prize.
Right, and I think that's all the more reason to be very, very selective in whom you marry. It just stands to reason. I'm sure we've all seen situations whereby you're looking at it from the outside and you see a situation. How did she ever marry that guy? I mean, everybody can see this guy is not good for her, and sure enough, works out that way, and it ends up in divorce. But yet that, they say love is blind, I guess, but I don't believe that. But that's the thinking, is that the person that's close to the situation can't see that. And they just only see the good things in a person. Well, I hate to tell you, everybody is not all good. And you better weigh out the bad things as well as the good things before you start making a lifelong decision. And, we've probably all seen it. I've seen it. And I stand back and say, how could you not have seen that? And then it all eventually blows up. And I know people personally that has been through that. But it happens. So I think it happens for the wrong reasons, that they're not diligent in selecting someone they're going to spend their life with or think they're going to spend the rest of their life with. They're just not diligent enough about it. And it's not a bad thing to listen to advice. It's not a bad thing taking some advice from people around you. That's a huge decision in life, and it causes a lot of people a lot of grief. They say, I don't know if it's true, but they say half the marriages in this country end up in divorce. That's what I've heard. I don't know how true it is, but
It's just recently gone over that 50.
so it's gone over that. Okay, I haven't really looked into it, but what does that tell you?
I think the divorce rates are like 75% or something, they said.
75%.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even, the new statistic that we should look at, while we all can relate to a divorce rate, look at the number of partnerships that don't ever have a marriage. So
For sure.
they're just as much a sin as someone who gets divorced. It doesn't change the fact.
Oh, sure.
We need to focus on the sin itself, not the sinner. And so, just as you talk about the love is blind, sometimes, while that may or may not be true, there are examples that go the opposite direction, where they get married and then they become closer to God, or they pull their partner to God. But again, at the end of the day, when you are done with this life and you are judged, it's your actions. Nothing that your partner can say or do will ultimately change your actions. They are still yours. You will be judged on those actions.
The statistics, I'm just going by statistics, that's all. Statistics do not lie. The statistics say that if you're a Christian and you marry a non-Christian thinking that you're going to convert that person after you get married, the statistics are so far against you, it's not even close. Not only that, the chances are even greater that you will lose your Christianity because you will be drawn away by an unbelieving spouse. They're very high. So don't ever think about, I'm going to convert that person. I've heard it. I'm sure you've heard it too. No, the time to convert a person is before you get married. And if that person doesn't seem to have any interest, well, how do you think he's going to have an interest afterwards, he or she? Going to have an interest afterwards. How could you possibly think that way? I'm just going to convert him. I'm so good at that, I'm going to do it. Well, guess what? Statistics prove otherwise. It just doesn't happen often.
By the same token, there's no guarantee that if you do marry a faithful Christian,
Yep.
that both of you are gonna just work right hand in hand down the line. But I would say that statistically, and I don't know the statistics, but they're more in your favor then than they were if you marry a non-Christian.
And the statistics also say, kind of getting back to you a little bit there, Statistics also prove, I love statistics because they don't lie, they just don't lie. Statistics show that if you live together with a person before you get married, you have a greater likelihood of divorce than if you had not. That's statistics.
Which is ironically opposite of what I found society saying. is
Exactly.
Very, very weird. And, as we continue to talk about statistics, that's because it's the law of average, right? We can take a look at what the world is doing, and Jesus, it's written here kind of what's going to happen, right? The path is wide, but the gate is narrow. That gate may be single file. And we're talking about, Interstate 80 off ramp, and then there's single file when we get out of the car. You could have all of the world trying to get in, but he's only allowing so many, and he's only allowing those that meet the criteria to do as well. And so, again, as we continue to look at those numbers, I think statistically speaking, or the law of average, we are the minority number in all of the averages. For us to get there is so minority, but that's what he wants. He doesn't want everyone to get in, otherwise why would it be of value to get in? He wants us to earn what very few others are doing. And so that way when we're there amongst those brethren that have made it, they all share the same values, they all see the same way.
And there's no guarantees when you're dealing with the human race. You're dealing with human beings. There's no guarantees for anything. The Bible can give us a way to go, a path to go, and this is going to be your best path. There's no guarantees, though, as far as this subject is, because, I've known cases personally where two Christians got married and then they got divorced sometime later. So how do you figure that? I mean, it's really something. I mean, it kind of blows you away a little bit here. And they were faithful Christians, and yet it happened.
My dad always told me growing up, the only things guaranteed are death and taxes. So far, he's definitely 100%.
Yeah, and statistics will prove that.
Yes, it will.
Okay, we kind of hammered that one a little bit. The answer to 3 was the answer that I had. I don't know what you had, but I put down that she was willing to honor her marriage commitment. That's what I get out of Abigail. Again, we're not given much information for sure, but I do know that she honored that commitment. From what
I
we
had
do.
one more little tidbit that, she sought for his good, even though he didn't really seek for her good. She honored him and sought for his benefit, and pleading
That's a good
for his
point.
life.
Yeah, we're going to see that here a little bit later. That's a good point, that she looked out for him even though, the situation was bad. She still did the right thing. She did the right thing. That's important. It's hard to do the right thing when it's not easy. I mean, it's just not, try doing the right thing when oh man, this isn't easy at all, but maybe I ought to just let it go. But to do the right thing, and that's kind of her claim to fame here, She has very little space in the Bible, but here she is recorded for all time. See, and that's the important thing. God saw fit to record this for all time, for us to know about and to learn from. So, that's that. Okay, number 4.
I had one thing I wanted to
Yeah.
mention there. In verse 19 of chapter 24, she said that she was looking out for the Lord's anointed herself, because she knew David was going to be the king.
Yes, she did.
So that was a motivation there for her too, knowing that he was going to be king, to protect him basically, and to give him this counsel to don't do it.
Yeah, that's just another plus for her, that she was looking out for others. She was looking out for others. She was looking out for Israel by trying to guide this king who was about to commit genocide and could have harmed his kingship and his standing with the people. I don't think this would have gone over too well. And so, boy, you really got to hand it to her. That's something to think about when you are in situations. Yeah, I'm not going to be in this exact situation for sure, but I'm going to be in situations, and this could apply. You're looking out for the welfare of somebody else, and you're not looking out to get anything from it. Somebody said one, I don't know who it was, maybe it's a famous thing, I don't even know, but somebody said that if you help someone and you're looking to get something in return, you're not helping anybody. You're not helping anybody. If you're looking to get something in return, then you're not helping anybody. You don't look for things in return when you're helping. She wasn't looking for anything in return that's stated here. So that's the way to help people. Don't look for anything in return. Yes, you might get a blessing in return. Sure, that could happen. But don't be looking for it. Don't look for that pat on the back. Oh, see, I did this really good thing. Yeah, it was a good thing, all right. Oh, well, how come no one's patting me on the back? Well, you shouldn't be looking for that.
Real quick stat for you. 41% of all first marriages end up in divorce. 41%. 60% of second marriages end in divorce. And 73% of third marriages end in divorce.
It doesn't get better. It just gets
Gets
worse.
Is there a year on that statistic?
2022.
Okay, that's recent. Okay, word of the wise. Okay, number 4. Were David's men overbearing or demanding of Nabal?
No.
No. They were just the opposite. They were very reasonable and non-demanding. What was Nabal's response?
I don't know you. Why should I feed you? Basically, that's what he was saying.
Yeah,
I have no
pretty
idea
much.
who you are.
Yeah, pretty much. He knew who he was, though.
Probably.
He
but-
knew. He was just saying that, Oh, who are you? Who are you, man? I don't know you guys. It was that kind of attitude, is what it was.
But
And
his men said different.
yeah,
His men said they protected us, we were out of the woods.
exactly, exactly,
They backed David up and his men.
exactly.
So they knew him.
They knew, and so did he.
And so did he.
He knew. So, this is just smoke and mirrors. I put down, he did not, his problem was, he did not recognize David's service to him. That was the problem. He didn't recognize that service, or honor it, I should say. I mean, he recognized it. He did recognize it, but he didn't honor it. And that, he should have, and he didn't. And he was very selfish. I would put selfish in there as one of the words.
Or could he just have been a skinflint?
Yeah, could have been.
He just tried to get out of his responsibility.
Could have been a lot of things. Then I put down, they went back and told David what David's men went back and told David what Nabal had said. So that's how David found out. Okay, because it says there, what was the response of David's men? And that was the response. They went back and they told him about what Nabal had said. Well, that infuriated David. I mean, this was no small thing here. I mean, he was infuriated, I think, to the point of losing touch here a little bit. This was big time. He was going to wipe out all the males in that city, or whatever it was. He was going to wipe them all out. Make sure that city was not going to continue. So that's what he was going to do. That's what he had in his heart. We mentioned this last week, very, very uncharacteristic of David. Not that David didn't sin again. He did. David and Bathsheba and all that whole story, pretty bad there. But this is uncharacteristic of who David was, especially just recently with Saul.
In verse 12, where it says that David's young men turned on their heels and went back, that paints a picture in your head. I don't know if it kind of makes me, I don't know, say chuckle, but it's an interesting thought. They didn't fight with him, they didn't they didn't push back with him and say, oh, you better, you better come to your senses. They just said, okay, and
Yeah.
just turned on their heels.
Well, that's a good point. Even David's men didn't say anything.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. They just took orders and they were going to go and do it. And that's kind of interesting.
They kind of knew their place.
Yeah, it took a woman, you know.
Well, David even told them before they went up that they were to be kind and, don't raise the fuss or stink.
Right.
Basically is what he told them.
Right, and that's what they did, not to cause any conflict. And that's what they did. Well, guess what? That all changed. Okay, number 5. What disappoints you about David in verse 13? What disappoints you?
He's acting from a place of vengeance.
There you go. That's exactly right. That's exactly what I had. He was acting on impulse, driven by anger and vengeance. Don't ever put yourself in that position. I'm telling you straight. If you've never been in that position, don't ever get in that position. And you can see when things are not going right in your own little world, and you can kind of get knocked off kilter and go down the wrong road. You can see that. We're capable of that. But David didn't even think. I mean, he just was acting out of pure vengeance and anger, and that never ends well. That never ends well. So don't put yourself in that position.
If you've ever seen two kids on the playground swapping punches because one did something to him, it just escalates. It doesn't,
Right.
acting in vengeance never de-escalates.
Right. I actually saw 2 parents encourage that. Their own 2 kids. I saw that only one time that I can remember, and I'll never forget it. This is a long time ago when I was just small. And I stood there and really couldn't believe my eyes, and it was, okay, get in there, do this, get in there and do this. And then after it was all done and the bloody noses and everything else, okay, now shake hands. Now wait a minute, I'm not shaking nobody's hand that I just clubbed. I'm not going to do that. But it's amazing. That stuff goes on. And it gets worse as you get older, and that's why we have wars. Pure and simple. Okay, 6. Why do you think Abigail wasn't willing to let things play out on their own? In other words, whatever will be, will be. She could have taken that attitude very simply. I'm guessing to a point we've all maybe have done that. To a lesser degree maybe, but I think we could easily have taken that position ourselves. They're going to do what they're going to do. Just let it be. Let them do what they're going to do. Instead of possibly being the peacemaker, as Abigail was, instead of being that peacemaker, and you take an active position, and you step in, and you make your voice heard. Now, they may listen, they may not, but at least you tried, and I think that's kind of on us to do that.
In today's society, it's very much on us. As a matter of fact, you could go as far to say it is a commandment, because we are to show others that God exists and that we know the Bible and we know these things. Just because they're not hearing doesn't mean we can't tell them.
Absolutely.
It's not our job to decide whether they're hearing or not. It is our job to decide whether we're going to show them the word or not.
Yeah.
And so we need to continue to do that.
Yeah. And Jesus said that specifically. If they have ears, let them hear. Some implying some are not going to hear. They're going to hear, but they're not going to hear. They're not going to take it in. And he made that point more than once, I think.
And when that happens, to go back to your other vengeance and vengeance, that may strike anger in us. That may be an angry moment, like he's just not getting it. It's not ours to judge. We do not get to make that decision. God does. Mm-hmm. And that decision may not be, we may agree or disagree with it. It's still not ours to make. Our job is to just simply show them the way.
Yeah, exactly. My answer there was, she was smart enough, and she was smart. That's the word I would use. She was smart enough to know the dire consequences of an angry confrontation. She was smart enough to see that coming and to preempt it. She just didn't wait until it almost happened. She preempted the whole thing, which was even smarter. That's the best time to kind of quell a situation, is you preempt a situation. Don't let it get to the point where it's getting ready to boil over, and then it becomes really hard. It could be.
When you think about it, if she had just let things be, from a very superficial, short-sighted view, it would have worked out in her favor. It would have basically gotten rid of Nabal.
That's true.
But
That's a good point.
But she knew, like you said, she was smart enough, and she knew that it wasn't gonna work out to the best of either side. It was gonna harm David.
Yeah, I mean, if she really wanted to get rid of her husband, here was the perfect situation. Just let him go. Just let him go at it. I'm going to get rid of my husband. This is going to be great. Well, she wasn't thinking that way. She wasn't thinking of herself. She wasn't thinking of herself.
In verse 25, it says, when she was talking with David, and she said, "Please let not my lord regard this scoundrel Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young man of my lord whom you sent." She may have had, after having lived with him, knew what his response would be to that question about helping him, and preempted this thing, because she knew this guy's unstable. I mean, he's not, how would you call him, sane or whatever. He's not a good thinker on this. His answer is going to be one that you're not going to be happy with.
Yeah, for sure. And then a follow-up on that, what would the Lord have me do? And that's a good question. What would the Lord have me to do? We should be thinking about that. Okay, I'm in a situation. Okay, well, what does God teach me about handling a specific situation? What would the Lord have me do? I think that's a valid thought there. Simplify areas and it would simplify areas of decision making. Discuss specific steps, blah, blah. We're not going to get into that as well. I just add, do the right thing. That's the way I see this with Abigail. She did the right thing. She sized up the situation. She waited out. She knew what was going to happen, and she did the right thing. I believe she put it in God's hands at that point, because that's all she could do. She couldn't intervene in a battle. She couldn't do that. But she could, through thinking, preempt it. That she could do. So, I don't think it's in the questions, what did she do to kind of attract David's attention? And I'm not talking about falling down before him and all that. What did she do? What was David after? Primarily, by doing what he was doing here.
Brought him food.
Yes. Okay, they were out to get food for his men, and that's basically the share in the wealth, so to speak. And so she knew that. And so what did she do? She prepared all of this food, a huge amount of food. I don't know how they did this. That tells me that there were a lot of people involved here. That's what that tells me. She had servants, whatnot.
Amazing to know how she kept that from her husband.
Yeah, well, maybe he was all getting drunk. He was drunk in Scripture there. Who knows? But obviously he didn't know. And so she prepared all of this food, knowing that that's what David was looking for. That was his payback. So she got him his payback and took it to him. So she put it on donkeys, it says, and carried it off and, met him and gave it to him. So that kind of interceded there. That made a little sense. Kind of interceded. Okay, he's getting what he wants. Okay, but he's still full of anger and everything, and she had to get over that, which she does. Okay, number 7. Discuss Abigail's wise plan of action that would protect the king-elect from murder, and discuss her humble words of wisdom that she offered to David. Okay, we just mentioned her wise action. She gave David the provisions due him. That's one thing she did. And then she was willing to take. Now this is interesting. If you read those verses, I wish we had time. We could read through there. She was willing to take the guilt of her husband. Did you read that in there? It's in there. She was willing to take the guilt of her husband on herself. And that's what she told David. You know, may it be on me. I forget the exact words, but, you know, may it be on me. Not on my husband. May it be on me. And so she was willing to be guilty of something she was not guilty of. Now, how hard is that? That's not a good feeling. Did you ever get accused of something you didn't do? Did you ever does that ever happen? I'm sure you probably have. I have. Especially when I was little. I was always, I probably did most of them though, but she was willing to take that guilt. So that's another thing here about her character, willing to take on her guilt.
Where does it say that she was?
Yeah, it's there. Okay, I thought somebody would ask me. Huh?
24.
24. Okay, on me, my Lord, on me, let this iniquity be. Very, very telling of her character. Not hard to take on somebody. Kind of reminds me of how Christ took our guilt upon himself on the cross. Same idea. Same idea. Okay, number 8. We're not going to have time to do number 8. I wanted to go through those verses there, but we're just not going to have time. You know, it says what in this chapter reveals yet another reason why David was a man after God's own heart. That's a whole other kind of subject, so we're not going to get into that. Discuss the wound in Abigail's heart. I couldn't find any scripture that say her heart was wounded. It's not there. When she returned home and found her husband drunk. I didn't get that. I mean, it's not there, but that's just his opinion. I'm sure it's just an opinion he
I
had.
answered them with, what wound? Possible normal behavior. I mean, he's already shown what a jerk he was. So I don't know that her going back and seeing it doesn't give us any reference that she was wounded in her heart or upset.
Right,
It's like, hey, this is maybe.
Again, she was smart enough. This is the way I have it. She was smart enough to know that her husband in a drunken stupor, that's not the time to confront somebody. That is not the time to do that. And she could have done it, but that's not the time to do that. And she did not do that. She just went off and waited till the next day after he slept it off. Okay, that's when she brought it up. So that was a very smart move. And then getting back as part of the other question there in number 9, that John said, she saved his life, but she could not tell him as he was drunk. That's what I said. She couldn't tell him. She actually saved his life, but she couldn't tell him that. Isn't that something? She couldn't tell him. So she just didn't say anything. But all you can do there is says, what advice would you give a woman today who faces a similar situation? And you should make, parallels to today. That's why we're given this. Draw a parallel from it into our time. It's the same thing. And basically the way I see her here is that she was a godly woman. She was smart. She knew the course of action to take. She relied on God, I'm sure of that. And she led by example to her husband. She led by example. And we just read that in 1 Peter. That's worth reading again, I think. Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives. So if you're in that situation, you ought to read that verse over a number of times. By your conduct, you can win, possibly, over an unbelieving spouse. Could go either way, man or woman, could go either way. That's such an important verse, and I think it applies here.
That's what it says in 1 Corinthians 7. Also, there's different scenarios that are set up there.
Yeah,
The wife and the husband, or wife.
Exactly.
Either one.
I got that down there too. I was going to get into that, but we don't have time. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 7 also deals with this subject about being married to an unbelieving spouse and what's your recourse. I mean, you hate to point fingers, but, you know, in my opinion, and I'm just going to give my opinion, I've done it. Hey, you shouldn't marry a non-Christian. You shouldn't